It's my pleasure and honor to be here to introduce Chancellor Julio Frenk. Before we hear from the Chancellor, I'd also like to acknowledge the Associate of the Chancellor, Dr. Felicia Marie Nall, who is with us here today. Dr. Nall has a special connection to our discussion. She and Chelsea Clinton worked together previously through the Clinton Global Initiative, and she is a longtime advocate for reducing health inequities. Thank you for being here, Dr. Nall. Now let's welcome UCLA's 7th Chancellor, Julio Frenk. Chancellor Julio Frenk is a leading global health researcher who has held positions in both government and academia, both in the US and Mexico. He became UCLA's 7th Chancellor in this past January 1st. Chancellor Frenk is also a distinguished professor in the Department of Health Policy and Management within the UCLA Fielding School of Public Health. Before joining UCLA, Chancellor Frenk served as the president of the University of Miami from 2015 to 2024, and as dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health from 2009 to 2015. As the Federal Secretary of Health of Mexico from 2000 to 2006, the Chancellor implemented a groundbreaking program which expanded healthcare access to over 55 million uninsured people. Chancellor Frenk was the founding Director General of Mexico's National Institute of Public Health, and he has held senior roles at the World Health Organization and at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Chancellor Frenk earned his medical degree from the National University of Mexico, as well as a Master of Public Health and a joint PhD in Medical Care Organization and Sociology from the University of Michigan. His career as a global public health researcher includes close to 200 articles in academic journals, as well as many books and book chapters, which have been cited more than 37,000 times. And in addition, he has written 5 novels for children explaining the functions of the human body. So we feel very, very lucky to have him here with us today. Please help me welcome to the stage UCLA Chancellor Julio Frenk.
Thank you, Catherine, and good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to UCLA in this beautiful day on this beautiful campus. It's really an honor to be with all of you this afternoon because the issues you are here to discuss are really so timely at this moment, so important to have these conversations around human rights. It takes courage and it takes perseverance to stand up for human rights in our world. And to make it a central part of our lives and our purpose in life. I think in these very turbulent times, you are truly our very best hope. And I do hope our students here are inspired by all that you do. Before going further, I want to thank 2 distinguished leaders here today, Dr. Nobel Peace, who nurtures human health not just through innovation, but also through philanthropy. And my dear friend, Dr. Eric Israelian, who heals not just through medicine, but also through generosity and education. And thank you all for being here, for standing up for the inherent dignity of every human being. We live in a time of unprecedented turmoil, unprecedented attacks on universities, on research, unprecedented peril to the basic notions of human rights and equity. And in these times, it's easy to see people in categories, create categories of people, assume the categories are homogeneous, no longer see the individuals who form part of those categories, and then construct them as the other and dehumanize them. And history teaches us that the stigmatization of groups, if left unchecked, leads to the worst atrocities. We have to counter this tendency through connection. I see that as a fundamental role of universities. And it is through connecting, becoming connective institutions as a university, that we may neutralize some of those tendencies, especially when we connect not just to those who we know, so especially with those who we do not know, those who are different from us. And that's why it's so important to cultivate diversity within educational spaces. We can only become connected when we're able to listen to each other. And again, I see universities as institutions that process the necessary differences among people through the use of reason and dialogue, and not through the use of force and hate. That is one of our key roles. If we do that right, universities become exemplary institutions, a role that is particularly important to espouse, because it's the idea, it's actually a very old idea in universities, that through the values they embrace and the behaviors they exhibit, universities set an example for the larger society of which they are a part. And that's the idea of being not just connected, but also exemplary institutions. One more role of universities, which is why I'm so grateful for us being able to host this meeting today here, is the function of convening, of bringing people together with different perspectives to illuminate and discuss the most consequential topics affecting humanity, as you have been doing all day today. In this room, we have people approaching humanitarian crisis from every angle, passionate advocates who risk their lives for others and who give voice to the voiceless. And we have scholars and leaders who are unafraid to ask the toughest questions and who seek evidence-based systemic change. You are breaking down silos. You're connecting law, public health, public affairs, the humanities, engineering, and many other disciplines. You are bringing a global perspective to local problems, reminding us that everything is simultaneously local and global. Everything global affects the local and vice versa. So this is a very important meeting. I'm really delighted that you are holding it at UCLA. As you heard, I just joined 4 months ago. It's been a very interesting first 4 months. We started with a series of wildfires, a big crisis, the biggest emergency in the history of this city. And then we have gone to a sequence of a barrage of orders threatening some of the fundamental aspects of what universities are all about. So having your meeting today here really is incredibly meaningful for us. And we are honored to be joined for the next panel by 3 impactful humanitarians. Leymah Gbowee, Chelsea Clinton, and Peter Laugharn. They demonstrate everything I was talking about, the idea of connection, the idea of the possibility of connecting, the idea of being exemplary in our work. Their work draws on personal experiences to unleash systemic change. Leymah Gbowee is a leading proponent of nonviolent protest. She was awarded the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize for her role in ending the civil war in Liberia. And she's committed to women's rights. She's a great advocate, a social worker, and founder of the Gbowee Peace Foundation Africa. Chelsea Clinton, who I know very well because we both work in global health, strives to improve lives and inspire emerging leaders across the world. She's an ardent advocate for early child development and for public health as vice chair of the Clinton Foundation, and a very, very prolific published author and teacher at Columbia University. And Peter Laugharn uses the power of philanthropy to support vulnerable children. He's president and CEO of the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation and has expanded educational opportunities for countless young people throughout his career. The moderator for their discussion is Scott Kraft, a distinguished journalist and editor-at-large of the Los Angeles Times. I hope that you leave this discussion not just as an observer or a listener, but as a partner in what I'm sure will be a very, very vigorous discussion. I hope that we will all feel emboldened to stay connected and committed to dialogue and to human rights. Thank you, and again, welcome to UCLA.
It is our honor to now welcome to the stage our distinguished panelists and the moderator of our closing conversation, the editor-at-large for Los Angeles Times, Scott Kraft.
Thank you, Chancellor Frenk, for that introduction and the wonderful sentiment. Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. I know it's been a day of debate, revelation, inspiration, maybe a little bit of some frightening thoughts as well. We've been served a multi-course meal, and I'm honored to be here to help serve dessert. And maybe if I'll take the metaphor one step further, maybe a little caffeine to send us on our way. Our keynote topic, local power, global change, could not be more relevant today. As we all know, many of the government forces for change have abruptly disappeared in recent months, leaving chaos and uncertainty in its wake. That is alarming, of course, but we know that lasting change doesn't trickle down, it rises up. And it's also impervious to hand-wringing. The chaos today would be even more alarming if the world didn't have local grassroots powerhouses like those represented at this conference and on this panel. Our three keynote panelists today hail from different corners of the world, but they share a superpower: the ability to turn big ideas into real, lasting change. Whether it's fighting for health equality, advocating for peace, or building partnerships for social justice, they have the vision and the grit to tackle the toughest challenges. I guess I'll begin where probably every panel today has begun, we want to get to the special questions of local engagement, which I'm very interested in, local power, driving change. But perhaps first, I'd like to hear from the panel, and maybe we'll start with Chelsea if we could, a little bit more about how you all are adjusting to the new landscape where the U.S., long such a major force in health, community building, so many other areas, has abruptly exited the stage, or we don't even know exactly what's happening, but mostly exited the stage at the moment. So I'd like to ask each of you, what impact, if any, this has already had on your efforts and your strategy, and your jobs, to me, seem to have gotten a heck of a lot harder in the last few months. But perhaps there's also some opportunity in this, certainly more demands made of the people in this room, people on this panel, I would think. So how is it kind of playing out in your areas? Chelsea, could you begin?
Oh, goodness. Well, Scott, thank you for moderating today. I also want to thank everyone here at UCLA for convening us here. You mentioned caffeine. I flew in from New York today. I'm especially grateful for the actual caffeine from everyone who works in this beautiful conference facility. It's so nice to be with my friend Julio. While Julio was being introduced, I realized I have had the privilege of being with Julio at Harvard, Miami, and now UCLA. And certainly I'm incredibly grateful to my friend Armin and everyone at Aurora. I think the challenge, Scott, is that there are not only as many answers to your question as there are people in this room who are navigating the chaos and the uncertainty. But the answer to your question also has to change every day. And yet, I think in some ways, while the answer must change every day as we think to how best to protect work that we're doing, that our partners are doing, to ensure that people are getting the services that they deserve, whether they're here in Los Angeles or anywhere around the world, we also can't lose sight of kind of what and why we're engaged in the work and how we're doing it. And certainly at the Clinton Foundation, if I think about our global health work, the Clinton Health Access Initiative, more than 95% of the people who work in our global health program work in the countries in which kind of they're from. We don't receive USAID funding, and so we have not kind of had the same type of immediate kind of cold face scramble that I know many of our partners have done, who were reliant on USAID funding, who had kind of many Americans kind of effectuating that work. And so I'm deeply cognizant that kind of we had built in a more locally determined way that has provided more resilience for that local work to still continue to be delivered. We're also, though, deeply engaged in work around the country, including right here in California, in trying to ensure that children anywhere and everywhere are surrounded with anything and everything that we would want for our own kids. And so we work on everything from early literacy to kind of diaper access to kind of building kind of safer, more climate resilient playgrounds. And again, while we don't receive kind of US government funding for that work, we're working in Head Start programs and WIC clinics and public parks and public playgrounds. And so trying to figure out how we continue to be in solidarity and community and to do the work that we know has been impactful in delivering, millions of books and diapers and building 1,500 playgrounds and is also an iterative answer that has local permutations, but we know the work has to continue.
Leymah?
Well, thank you all for having me, and I'm honored to be sitting between Peter and Chelsea. When people talk about the moment, I smile, because this moment is my reality. My work has always been in chaos. It's never been a bed of roses. It's never been financially stable. I've never had, maybe this year, but for a long time, over 30 years, it's been one struggle after the other. And the one thing that has kept me going was my community. And most times I tell people that the peace work that we did, let me take a step back. We started that work to build peace in Liberia with $10 US from someone's handbag.
Yep.
Because the moment we wrote our story, our press release, then we turned to each other and said, how do we publish it? And someone said, I have an extra $10. So we called the one journalist we knew that could persuade her colleagues to put the story out there. Afterwards, it was one struggle after the other. Yesterday, I talked about how one donor offered me a job when I went to beg him for funding for the women's movement. So this moment, when people are talking about it, sometimes I feel like the divine was preparing me for now. I've never gotten US aid funding. I've barely gotten any other funding, but for the impactful work I have done, and we say it in West Africa, I can beat my chest to say I've done good work. It's been from courage, it's been from commitment to community, and it's been because it's the insurance policy that my children and the children in my community will have a better life. So it's never, ever been that way. When we protested when we didn't have money for bus, we walked. When we didn't have money for water, we fasted. When we didn't have money to buy the essentials that we needed, I remember we got to an internally displaced camp, and the government, Charles Taylor government, had said to all of the humanitarian organizations, you can't bring food. These people had moved through the night of bombing, and they were in a classroom, and he said no one can give them food because it was not a designated internally displaced camp. I called all the media people I knew, and in that moment, what we had was money to buy a bag of gari, which is like the ground cassava. We bought peanuts. We didn't have enough money for sugar, but we started distributing food, what we had to those people. And then the government came and said, oh, we did not say so. So when we talk about the movement, and I don't think it's just my experience, it's Julianne's experience, it's every African and every other person from developing country experience, that our work has never been about money, it has never been about stability, it's been chaos and functioning and having the most creative strategy in chaos.
I would say, too, as we can see from what you just said, that it's about leaning in. It's about, I'm reminded of your quote, which I wrote down, and I'm going to post somewhere in my office. You can never leave footprints that last if you are always walking on tiptoes. So I think that leaning in is important and not being afraid of headwinds. Peter.
Yeah, Leymah, I love hanging out with you, but you are one hard act to follow. But I would say something similar. First, AID was a big partner of the Hilton Foundation. We were in their hair frequently about locally led development. And if in an alternate universe where there were another administration now, we would be in their offices saying, fix your procurement system. and get more out locally. But I admire the way they had tackled this. That said, they are not the main deal. And neither is overseas development assistance the main deal. The main deal is households and communities and national governments, who are the mainstays of the well-being of people around the world. And official development assistance helps that, and we'll continue to figure out ways to do that. But our commitment as a foundation has always been in helping local organizations, local municipalities, et cetera, because they're the ones who will be there over the long haul. They're an abundant and renewable resource, and very highly trusted. The rest of the world, with some wobble in Europe, is still very interested in development, in climate, et cetera. And I was in a conference in Nairobi 10 days ago, and I loved it. It was positive, it was practical, it was non-neurotic. And it made me realize how much weight I've been carrying around here by moping and by worrying about the future. I think there are two things we need to do here in the States. One is to think about reform. We had a system built for the 1940s. This is an opportunity. The box has been shaken in a damn difficult way, but this is an opportunity to do something better. And it's also a time to tell our story better and re-engage our own compatriots in work that they actually believe in, but don't know that that's what is going on. May I hand back to you?
Well, what would you see, just to follow up on that, what would you see as the reform opportunity here?
Sure. Well, let's talk humanitarian system first, because I know that's a concern of this conference. Our humanitarian system right now was built out of World War II. It was built in times where people lived in refugee camps and went back home after 2 or 3 years. That has not been the system for 30 years. That's not been the reality of people. And yet our system continued to function as though it were. There is more displacement in this century, but there's also vastly more capacity than when the system was set up, which the system has not recognized. So I would say honor the 25% commitment that was made 10 years ago at the World Humanitarian System to local organizations, bring solutions close to people, and you know, for funders like us or bilaterals, you know, act as though you're not the main deal, but you trust the people who are, and you support them.
Chelsea, could you talk a little about the community-based work of the foundation and how, and maybe describe some of the success stories that you have that are kind of impervious to any kind of whatever happens with USAID or anything like that. And I know foundation doesn't take funding there, but they're interlaced with, you know, providing medicines and things like that. But aside from that, how do you build, and what are some success stories of building local partnerships?
Sure. Well, I think, Peter, something that I've always admired about both of my parents. You know, my mother started in NGO work well before she ever became a politician. I mean, she was the chair of the Legal Aid Services Corporation here in the United States. She brought the Grameen Bank to southern Arkansas in the early 1980s to have micro lending for farmers. I start your question kind of with that kind of precedent because I kind of grew up immersed in this, not only kind of zeitgeist and sensibility, but strategy of like, if you're not in government, you're trying to work yourself out of a job. You're trying to prove kind of what's possible outside of government so that either the public sector absorbs it and scales it, or where there's a kind of meaningful business case for the private sector to steward forward. And that ethos has permeated the Clinton Foundation from inception. I deserve no credit for that. I didn't kind of join any foundation efforts until about a decade in. But certainly, if kind of you look at our work globally and domestically, you thankfully see, you know, not a large kind of aperture between kind of the rhetoric and the reality, and that we only work, you know, just to build on what Peter was saying, in partnership with local governments, whether kind of local governments are the more than 36 countries across sub-Saharan Africa and Asia where we still work today, or the more than 6 in which we have worked, inclusive of kind of the Caribbean and Latin America where we're no longer working, or with local governments at a county and a city level here in the United States on everything from early childhood education, which I mentioned earlier, or our opioid response network work. And importantly for us, the people kind of leading the work are not only from the communities, but have real lived experience. So the person who leads our opioid response network work here in the United States is someone who has overcome his addiction use disorder, which he speaks about very openly in the efforts to continue to destigmatize alcohol and addiction use disorders here in the United States. And the work that we do on a global health basis, which you mentioned as relates to all the commodity work that we've done, we not only do in partnership kind of with local governments at a national, regional, kind of or city level, but also with people who are living with the diseases. So it's very important to us that community always be centered, and that we're constantly trying to work ourselves out of a job because of what can then later be absorbed by kind of local government partners, local community partners, or local private sector partners as well.
Leymah, you're local and global in a way. You're on both sides of this equation. How do you feel, what do you feel like is the current state of local peace activism efforts? Do you feel like, are we in a worse place than we've been before, or a more challenging place, or are things improving?
I think we're in a more challenging place than we were before. I would say this first, starting from the women's perspective. When we did our actions in Liberia and some of the other women's work that we stood on their shoulders before, a lot of people saw women's activism as a group of toothless bulldogs. Nothing is going to come out of this. They're looking for attention, blah, blah, blah. The success of our work and subsequent women's work has made it very difficult for other women to mobilize because people then see this as a form of dissent, a form of subversive activity. So in many communities, when women try to, the first thing that governments would do is to clamp down on it. When we work with a group of activists from Syria, one of the first things they said to us was that during the beginning of the war, when they tried to do some of the actions that they learned from Liberia and other places, they will form themselves, wear white, and go to protest. The government will not come to disband them. They will rather send women with clubs to beat them, so that it wasn't seen as they were doing. So if you go to other parts of the world now, you find that it's really very difficult. Either the politicians of the day will use money to dismantle or disband the group. So it's really, really very difficult. But having said that, you still have women in different communities who are pushing forward. The biggest challenge we have today is that everyone talks about the efficiency and the effectiveness of women's advocacy for peace. We see billions of dollars go into the military, billions of dollars go into peace processes that are driven by men. But when it comes to women's peace movements, we get peanuts and the dregs of funding. And most times my advocacy has been, you can't build peace with peanuts because peace is not cheap. War is expensive, peace is expensive. So today the challenge we see everywhere. Julianne and I sat down for breakfast the other morning, and we're talking about the first time we met, which was like decades ago. She had gone to the EU Parliament to talk about the rape in Congo. I had gone there to talk about the war in Liberia. Decades later, fortunately for us, the war in Liberia has ended. Decades later, Julianne is still moving around from one place to the other, doing great work around peace and mobilizing communities. The sad thing is, decades ago when I met Julianne, she was still talking about the difficulty of funding. Today, she's still having that same conversation. That is the major challenge of women building peace in our world today. I mean, let me just add, the men with guns fear the women making peace. That's something they've recognized.
Yeah, that's right.
But I do think, Leymah, at least the incentives were such, even a decade ago, that men in elected office in this country and in Europe and kind of in the wealthier world, at least, I think, felt some pressure to have a performative appreciation for your work. They may not have had an authentic belief in it, but they felt as if they had to rhetorically kind of give standing and stature and solidarity. And I think that's also no longer true today in a deeply worrying way.
Interesting. And I guess it sounds like in Africa and really other places too, there's a fear more now of what, the political fear, which makes you more formidable, but it also makes you more of a target. I could see that.
That's true, but again, it comes back to, sometimes I think about my life and think about some of the things that I've done, and sometimes when we sit together as activists, we start conversations from 6 in the evening, and it goes on to 7 in the morning, just reminiscing about the things we've done in Liberia. And it's never really been about your personal safety. I'll give a typical example. The day we went to meet with Charles Taylor, that was a tough day in Liberia for all of us, for women, everyone. When I got home that evening, we got a tip-off that there were going to be a raid on my house that night. Every young man in my neighborhood came and sat on my front porch. Every old lady in my community came, including my grandmother. We stayed up, keeping company. By 12 to 1 in the morning, there were these vans coming with beaming headlights, and we knew that the soldiers were coming. When they saw the crowds out, they stopped, sat there for a long time, and drove away. And that, for me, is the spirit of the work that I do, that there will always be community people that will stand up for you. So at the end of the day, who are you? Not to, if I was arrested today in any country in the world, I'm sure Aurora will put out a statement, Hilton will put out a statement. I'm talking about all of the groups that I'm affiliated with. Women around the world will put out statements. But those women in the communities that are suffering every day, when we say we represent them, we must walk our talk.
Yeah. Peter, I think she served up a good question for you. When it comes to funding for groups like that, women's groups, peace groups, what is the specific challenge there, and what are foundations looking for in terms of qualities that they'd like to see in those organizations?
Sure. I think, well, let me phrase this broadly about where Hilton has been. 10 years ago, we've always done about half of our grant making globally, but we did almost all of it through U.S. blue chip nonprofits, Save the Children, World Vision, CARE, who are wonderful organizations that do tremendous work, right? But we said, hey, we don't need to do this, right? There are lots of capable people. There are lots of strong organizations, but it's us who need to be better informed about where they are and how we can be in touch. So we embarked on what you could call a whole of org. How can we get better, better relationships and better intel about what's going on locally? And this meant we looked at how we source grantees and made sure that we informed ourselves much more broadly. And our board needed to get less comfortable with relationships they'd had for decades, right? It meant that we needed to make our systems less burdensome to organizations that are doing great work in the field, but don't have the time or staff to spend putting together lots of reports that are really not germane to what they do and read and put on a shelf in the funder. It meant that we had to reconsider our risk. People thought, it might be risky to fund organizations in Liberia or organizations in Colombia. We actually, when we did the math, more money is lost by legitimate evaporation if you fund a US-based organization to do work overseas than will be lost by any non-charitable activity done by organizations that you fund locally, particularly if you show yourself to be a good funder, if you show curiosity and good partnership, good organizations will come to you. And people around you, as Leymah was saying, will identify those organizations that are strong and trustworthy and reliable. And I think often we put together accountability systems, M&E systems, all of these evaluation systems that are much heavier than they need to be for us to serve as a solid funder. So my basic question to us, to other foundations, to bilateral donors, is how do you set yourself up as a good partner? And what does good donorship mean? And that will lead you to organizations like Leymah's.
And Chelsea, you similar foundation work in the health space. How do you feel about that? How do you approach that?
You know, I was admittedly, as I was listening to your question, Scott, and then to Peter's initial reflections, you know, thinking about something that we haven't discussed, at least in our panel, and I wasn't here earlier, so it may have emerged in previous moments throughout the convening today, which is how reliant, though, in kind of obvious and subtle ways, so much of kind of the humanitarian architecture, the development architecture, whether in global health or other arena, actually has been on information that effectively, though, has been produced by the United States. And so by that, I mean everything from kind of USAID funding the Early Famine Warning Network to the Human Rights Report, which Secretary Rubio certainly has informed us will be a very different type of document with different areas of focus and, shall we say, completeness or lack thereof of information. From the CDC's weekly morbidity and mortality report, which, while generally focused on the United States, often had kind of global presence. And one of the first most ignominious things I think this administration did was to not publish that report in its first few weeks, kind of an interruption that was unprecedented. It had been published every week since 1961, including after September 11th. And so I think we haven't fully reckoned kind of with that risk to the work that all of us are engaged in, of what it will mean when we don't have information, whether about kind of famine or conflict or human rights abuses. How do we then understand kind of where to kind of purpose work with urgency, kind of with kind of sustainability and scalability, how best to work with to empower local partners to, again, work ourselves out of a job if we're living in a miasma of no information. I mean, we often talk about kind of the mis and disinformation. I think that is a real concern, and another that kind of the Trump administration has no longer, will have mechanisms to try to ameliorate and correct. But I actually think the larger challenge is going to be the vacuum of data that we are already confronting and that will become only kind of more apparent kind of week over week. And that's where I certainly, am looking forward to hopefully working with many people in this room and certainly our government partners around the world to try to figure out how to kind of creatively fill that as quickly as possible.
Actually, misinformation has been a big issue, I think. And I mean, as you say, well, the vacuum.
So it's misinformation, and now it's going to be no information,
right?
Which, of course, then is fertile ground for misinformation because
right.
There won't be the juxtaposition to what the actual facts and evidence are. And then, yes, there is real ongoing misinformation, which I know certainly Leymah also had to encounter. Misinformation predates the internet for the young people here. It has long been a challenge kind of in any of the earnest work that we've all felt called to do, but it certainly has become accelerated and kind of even more of an impediment, I think, than any of us could have foreseen it would be.
Leymah, Chelsea just referenced that, the harmful narratives in conflict zones, which you no doubt deal with. How do you work with that? And are you concerned also that there won't be kind of a gold standard of information that you can actually at least refer people to?
Well, before I answer that question, the troublemaker in me is about to wake up. Because I was just listening to Chelsea and talk about all of the things that is happening here. And in my mind, even though I'm not the moderator, but I want to ask a question that could anger a few people, but I apologize for if it comes out the wrong way. Just blame it on the West African in me. Is it that in this country, and it's an honest question I'm asking, that people are still in shock of where this country is, and that they're still trying to intellectualize the problem that they are confronted with, and they're finding it difficult to mobilize? And I think that question is for you, Chelsea. I'm sorry, I'm not the moderator, but I have to. I'm just, as people, I've listened to all of the panels today, and I've heard stuff, and I've heard stuff, and I've heard stuff. And I started this conversation with, I've lived in chaos. Chaos has been my reality. So when I can stand a mile away and smell chaos, but everyone is calm in this country.
I'm not calm.
Oh, well, okay, then, because you've interacted with chaos. But it's just like we're trying to process, we're trying to intellectualize, we're shocked. Please help me.
Oh goodness. Well, Leymah, I want to be respectful. We have 13 minutes left, and that I have no doubt that Scott has other questions to ask. And so I just share that not as an escape hatch, but I'm happy to continue the conversation.
We definitely
I think a few things. I think one, you're right to focus on the chaos. I think it is disorienting, the velocity of change, of then sometimes retrenching on the change and then going forward on the change. I think it's also, I think, dislocating to realize that the chaos is purposeful. I think you're right to also kind of query, is it just that so many people are kind of caught in a sense of surprise, not only with the kind of bombardment of change, and also that bombardment is not accidental or incidental. I think that's part of what's going on. I think also people are scared. I think we certainly have seen how universities have reacted differently to this moment, and those that have stood up and stood forward to protect both the research that is being done kind of within our research institutions, but also the researchers who are doing that work and those who support the researchers doing that work. So that we have chaos and the confusion around the chaos, and the purpose of it is one. I think fear is very real and certainly continues to have a chilling effect. I think that everything that we've talked about kind of related to funding is also salient to organizations here in the United States, where many are seeing kind of their federal funding cut. They're seeing foundations, not the Hilton Foundation, but other foundations who in the first Trump administration had kind of stepped into the breach in kind of compensatory, complementary, and even kind of net new ways of support not materializing. I think that we also, to be fair to the Democrats in elected office, they're feeling a responsibility, which is, I think, more than understandable, to respond to everything that's happening every day what are we going to do about what the Trump administration may or may not be doing on Medicaid, may or may not be doing on public education, may or may not be doing on immigration. Why is the FAA having so many challenges? Like, and, that then makes it hard for there to be a coherent counter-narrative. So I think there are many reasons that explain what you are observing. And also, I would say, it's not an excuse. So I think it is important to understand, at least from my diagnosis in 2 minutes, I think how we are in this moment. And also, I think cynicism is really dangerous. And I think we have a lot of my fellow Americans who, again, for understandable reasons, are feeling cynical, like I can't do anything and therefore I shouldn't try. Nothing great has ever happened, at least generatively good or affirmatively powerful, out of cynicism. It happens out of optimism and community and organizing and both doing small incremental things to stop bad things from happening and help support good things from happening, and trying to make big things happen along the way. So I understand, but also share your challenges.
Scott, I apologize for taking over your role. So let me quickly answer.
No, next year, ensure that Leymah is the moderator and Scott can be a panelist to talk about what the role of the free press is in actually protecting free speech in these moments.
So let me quickly answer the question on misinformation. One of the things that I've recognized in my community is that when you are a symbol of leadership, you hold a voice. So when I won the Nobel Peace Prize that night, Desmond Tutu was the first Nobel laureate to call me, and he started calling.
Parenthetically, I love that she's like, well, he was the first, implying there were many others. She's like, well, he was the first.
Yes.
And then when Gary called, and then I was just up all night talking to everyone else.
Oh, Lord.
She didn't say I was wrong.
For the first time in my life, this young woman made me speechless.
Touche.
Anyway,
Chelsea,
so
do you have
he
more
said to
questions for
me,
Leymah?
he said to me, he said many things, but the one thing that stuck was, you're a Nobel laureate now. Be careful what you say, because whatever you say becomes a quote. And that has applied for me in my community. So, for example, I know there are many different things, especially flying around misinformation. So I have a way of verifying before I speak, because I know that my voice carries a lot of weight in that nation. So if someone posted something and tagged me on it, I would look for the community that it's and call someone who knows someone in that community. And then I would call some media person, call some government people. And then at the end of the day, if I say something, people begin to reference what I'm saying. It helps to neutralize. But this is because Liberia is a small place. How do you navigate misinformation in bigger context? And I think some of the strategy can apply. It's important for people, because most times when good people are silent about things that are important, they make room for evil to thrive. There are many good people in our world today, but the reason why this world looks like it's so bad is because we're silent. You know, if we turn off the light in this room and everyone use their cell phone light, we will make this room a beautiful room. So I feel like with misinformation, each of us have something that we can offer to counter it. And our silence is helping to perpetuate some of the issues that we're faced with in the world today. Yeah.
Even and maybe especially if it's coming from the government.
Yeah. And going back to what Chelsea originally raised on this one was the lack of information, the void of information. Peter, is that, I mean, how are it certainly would, I think, tie a hand behind the back of foundations that are trying to make smart decisions based on data, reports that, you know, a lot of us might find mind-numbing, but are really important, I think, to foundation work.
You're hurting my data heart with that. I'm like, give me statistics every day.
Well, I think Chelsea's right. You know, in the wreckage of what we've lost in the last 4 months, there are some very important information systems, stores of knowledge, you know, and I think we have to rebuild those. It won't necessarily be done by the US government, but I think they can and should be rebuilt. I would come back, though, to, you know, the USG is not your only source of information, and if it is, God help you, right? So even in a good year, right? So I think there are many other sources of information, and I would certainly go back, you know, as Leymah did, to people on the ground. If those are the people that you are trying to serve, then know best what their situation is and ask them. And I think we are in a, I don't know, I'm an optimist, right? I'm going to say something that will tick people off, but I think we are in a moment that has promise in it, because we can make the humanitarian system and the development system work as though people mattered, right? And I think they have grown into structures where everyone in them is very well intentioned, but they weren't delivering as they should have. And I think we can change that right now. To be wonky for a moment, one of the conversations at this Nairobi conference that I was very excited about was getting the development finance people and the locally led development people together in a room and talking to one another. The development finance people know all about capital flows, but often they just want to keep that stuff flowing without worrying enough about whose health gets better, about who gets through school. The locally led development people know all about that and care about it, but don't understand often the larger system. We can bring those together. Chancellor Frenk talked about the convening power of universities. That's tremendous. Foundations are a partner in that as well. And you know, we are both funded to exist, hopefully in perpetuity. We're both structured for independent judgment, and we're both structured for social good. So I think we should lean in to those superpowers right now, even if the government is giving us a hard time, even if those roles are questioned. And you know, my sense so far is that hard time is 95% bluster and 5% legal substance. And you look at the legal substance and you say, are we good? And if so, we just keep doing what we're doing.
I have to say, though, since Leymah already, I'm going to just piggyback on Leymah's apology if I say something uncomfortable. In that, you know, Peter, certainly, I mean, there's a set of reasons why we've never taken USAID funding, and I agree with all of the diagnoses that have been made about the, you know, so-called Beltway bandits over, you know, many decades of earnest, sincere, small and bold efforts alike to reform development assistance, not only here in the United States, but globally. I agree with many of the critiques that have been made for many decades about the Bretton Woods system. And also I find it completely indefensible that, you know, the pauses of PEPFAR funding, as one example, led an estimated 200 to 300 children to be born every day with HIV who otherwise would have been born without HIV. As I say to my children, many things are true. And I'm really angry. And so I'm going to hold the optimism, which I also am a naturally optimistic person. And I agree, like, you know, it's unfortunate that the system in many ways had been built with so many single points of failure that were related to the US government. Like, it should trouble all of us that we actually don't have an early warning famine system any longer, because it was 100% funded and hosted by USAID. And I'm going to be angry about the blithe, careless cruelty. Sure. Or that the President Malaria's Initiative is not protecting children against malaria because the chemotherapy prophylaxis are still stuck in USAID warehouses. How is that efficiency? I'm going to be angry still that DOJ has not defined efficiency. Whenever they are pressed, they often say things like, you know it when you see it. I'm like, so now we're quoting the Supreme Court on pornography? And all I want is, like, I want to know the denominator and the numerator and how you're going to track and assess it. So I'm going to be angry about that, and also be hopeful that we will get to a better place, but that does not excuse or exonerate the cruelty and the lives lost in the interim.
Scott, I know our time is up. Chelsea, welcome to the Angry People's Club.
Oh no, Leymah, I've been angry.
The one thing I have to warn you when you join this club, your father was once a president.
Yeah.
When you join the club, it makes you do things that people will be appalled at. My father was not a president, but welcome. Girlfriend, welcome.
Well, I know I'm doing something right if Leymah agrees with me. I mean, I'm still angry that we don't talk about abortion every day in this country, like while women are dying. So, I mean, I'm angry about lots of things, Leymah.
Well, that's a great note to end on, and I'm sorry we have to end on it. We could clearly continue this conversation for several hours, but I guess we'll just have to continue it over cocktails. Thank you all very much for your
Thank you, Scott.
insights.
Thank you, Scott.